Chapter 34 The Sins of the Father. The Henoled, once of the Gododine, with kin on the northern Roman wall, settled land in the northern part of Cymru to expand trading links with Cumbrael and Elanfanan and Eru, settled well under Cunedda and flourished by linking with the local Saxons with whom they traded. They kept the old ways and remembered their old gods. The Druid remembered for them, for they remembered the oral history of the Vote Geni as the Romans called them, right back to when they first invaded the island of Albion. While they spoke the same tongue as the southern Cymric, their ways were different, apart, and could be so for the mountains were both a defense and a barrier. Anyone venturing into Gwynedd must have had a good reason to do so, otherwise in that land they would have perished, for Cunedda was the enemy of Uther Pendragon. He had been supported to take the Gwynedd land by Gdn in exchange for defending Gdn's southern kingdom from the Irish. By defending Cunedda, he had left the lands that were now Camelot too lightly defended, and Uther took them. Defeating Gdn, an enemy's enemy was a friend. A broken bar loons did not mind the wind, speaking as it did of the old world. Nor did the screeches and moans and wails coming from Niceman and from the Eryri mountains put her off. Indeed, they were more welcoming than fearsome, whatever creatures lived there, whatever people of different cultures and society. Elund wanted to be there. She crossed the Menai Straits in a ferry boat, making landfall on a small beach beneath an outcrop of rock. She needed to find them, find the king of Gwynedd, or find the Druid, who had made her the offer through Morgause. Since her banishment, a black cloud had settled into her spirit. She didn't want to eat unless she forced herself to. She didn't sleep unless her body collapsed from sheer exhaustion. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the blood-red moon of the courtyard and heard the ring of Arthur's steel against the stone. 88,888,888. You are fading, Aled. A voice drifted through the mist. Elund knew that voice, so didn't reach for her blade. Matthew's voice was long in her memory, and it transported her back to their village, sharing bread and going on adventure in the wire forest. She turned to see the young man stepping from the shadows of the twisted oaks, no longer the frightened child she was forever encouraging on to do wilder things. Mordred now stood before her, his eyes glowing with a deep, unsettling ancientness that she recognized. "Leave me, Mordred," she breathed, her voice thin from lack of use. "I have nothing for you." Mordred stepped closer, but Elund collapsed at his feet, his presence a strange mixture of comfort and coldness. Aelid, a broken bar Elund. Mordred picked her up and carried her back to the Druids, placing her in his hut and nursed her, not with herbs, for a Druid healer had done that, but with the quiet, humming energy of the earth, grounding her when the flashes of the duel threatened to pull her into a permanent darkness. When she finally opened her eyes, Elund's strength returning, she saw her friend and reached for his hand. "You came to me a broken bar to us," Mordred stated. "And a broken bar we healed you." "Then I owe you a debt," Elund said softly, sitting up. "The Druids do not see a traitor when they look at you. They see the bridge, a woman of Saxon blood and Briton heart, guarding a king who does not yet deserve her." "He isn't a king," she snapped, a spark of the old fire returning. "He's a fool who listens to shadows and grief, and that is why you must leave," Mordred countered. He reached out, placing a hand on her brow. For a second, the mental static, the black cloud of her depression, fell silent. "I have seen the threads of the future, how they knit together." "Elund, Morgause is our enemy, not our friend. Camelot, under Arthur, is our best hope for the life we lead, and Morgause is plotting destruction for Camelot. If the prince falls to the darkness of his father's sins, the future we were promised dies with him." "What do I do?" Elund asked. "For I am cast out of Camelot." Mordred leaned forward, his face changing back to that of her friend, of hot summer days running around the pear orchards and scrumping, running from the farmers and the villagers in their exploits. "Since when has that ever stopped you?" 88,888,888. But how? How to return Camelot when the prince had told her to never return? And what effect would she have on Arthur if he would not listen to her? She remained with the Druids and Mordred for several months as her mind healed, watching their ceremonies, watching the preparation for a Barnhefin, Letha, is what the Saxons called it, Midsummer's Day, when the sun would show itself for the longest time, rising in the east and coursing overhead until it disappeared in the west. She would go, as Mordred told her to, and find a way back to Arthur's stay for the festivities, for the ritual. Círdan told her, "We remember how you helped my son." "Your son a broken bar?" Elune was shocked, but Círdan told her that it was an honorific title. All trainee druids were called son or daughter. "But you must leave before the ceremony, or you may be chosen," he told her. "Chosen for the sacrifice." He explained that anyone still within the bounds of the river has an equal a chance as any of the druids and trainees to be chosen for death, a prospect that horrified Elune, not for herself, but for the magical, pagan people in the community. That Mordred could be chosen, or anyone, to lose their life for their rituals. Elune spent the next few months involved with the practical and mundane, cleaning for Círdan and the group that lived with him and Mordred, collecting and chopping firewood, hunting, knowing after the Say festival of Esther there would not be many weeks left until midsummer. How would she leave it with Matthew? Would she ever see her friend again? Shortly after Beltane a message was brought to the settlement by a traveller heading to the Cymric who lived in the far north of Pitland, at Altclut. Contrived as it had been, that small coin was exchanged for his service as he was heading north with many messages. Elune, on guard duty, did not catch the man's name, but he told her that he was searching for the place he had been born and thought it was at Dumbarton, on the banks of the mighty river Clut. He stayed for a night but was gone in the morning, leaving several messages for the Druid leaders but also one for Elune. Aled. The water-stained pouch read. Inside was a scrap of parchment. There was no signature, only a faint, shimmering residue of gold magic that made the air smell like summer rain. A voice came from within the pouch, its words circling around her like an echo in a cavern. "A broken bar. He is breaking. Elune need a broken bar. He will not listen to me. A broken bar cannot look at Gwyn. A broken bar. If you do not return, there will be no king to return to. Broken bar. Only a ghost and a grave. A broken bar." Elune stared at Merlin's desperate words as they formed on the paper. Once they had passed through her mind, the undercurrent of her love for Arthur, which she had thought buried, surged through her like a physical, aching blow. She realized then that she could stay in the north, travel and find these other Britain, Cymric, settlements and let her mind wither in safety, or she could ride into the fire and risk death to stand beside Arthur Pendragon one last time. She sat beside the fire, showing the letter to Mordred, watching his eyes roam the parchment. "Emrys wrote this," Mordred told her. "Emrys, his druid name. If he ever comes to claim it, he is the strongest sorcerer ever and his path is to join us. So far, he has resisted." Mordred handed Elune back the letter, and held her hand for a moment. "He will hate me for returning," she whispered. "He will hate himself more if you don't," Mordred replied. 88,888,888. The air in Camelot had curdled on the return of Morgause, who had returned, not with an army but with a challenge, and had lured Arthur to a sorcerer's fountain, confirming his arrival into the world, purchased with the magic that Arthur now spent his life trying to eradicate. "Morgana broken bar," he whispered, not knowing the deal Elune had struck with the Druid elders. Help her fulfill her destiny with them and they would avoid Camelot and any deal with Morgause and the Saxons. For Arthur, his existence had been revealed as a lie built on the bones of his mother, and he returned to the citadel subdued and restless. So much so, Merlin took up an enchanted quill and wrote a desperate missive to Elune. 88,888,888. It was the eve of midsummer when Elune strode up the main path to the city, noting carts and tradespeople, merchants and servants going about their daily business. It felt right, as if all was happening according to the passing of time, the sun, the moon, the stars and planets. Except Elune was outside it all. A part for her did not exist. She pulled her cloak around herself and headed into the lower town. Bells rang for an evening service at the chapel near the alehouse, not so much marking midsummer, but the time of night that a service would take place, as it did every night. Except, midsummer felt special, even in a Christian citadel, and people felt more relaxed and easier going than she remembered. And so Elun's hypothesis held right up until the very end of the room, when she has bought a drink in the alehouse and sat, watching all around her, before striking up a conversation with the barman. A celebration, certainly, he told Elund, polishing a glass as did all barmen the world over, imparting information, waiting for the guest to share something in return. This one, however, was a very good questioner, and when she asked a follow-up question, he told her, the king, King Arthur, has risen from his bed and has been seen walking around the palace, issuing decrees, involving himself in the running of the place. He had a broken bar, because it had been over a year since Arthur Pendragon had done anything of use. So, Elund headed to the courtyard and to the back of the armory, looking for the guards. As ever, Elphice had found a quiet spot to doze where he should have been polishing the arm guards, and so Elund took advantage of the situation, changing into guard uniform herself, exchanging her leather outers for the single-linked mail. Where would Merlin be? In the chambers of Prince Arthur, on with Gaius. No one was in the prince's rooms. A shout behind her as she turned to head towards Gaius's tower, and she turned. It was Sir Hector, who was pacing up to her. You should not be here, he warned the intruder. Elund turned, gripping her sword. Sir Hector? Elund asked. Or looking for Prince Arthur? When he saw it was Elund, Hector did not drop his stance. Both, Aled. And I have instructions to kill you on sight. Yet you haven't, she told him. Is that the king's order? You there? Came a voice behind Hector. Another guard hurried to them. It was Kay. And behind him, the man who had tried to engage her in political marriage. Lord King, Elund exclaimed, bowing her head automatically in deference. Her hand was only inches from her Sikh's, though, and she let her mind devise the plan that would defeat all three men. You, he repeated, stand before your king. I have no king, Elund declared. Then saw the man who had given her several chances to live in Camelot, given her refuge. Except for Arthur Pendragon. She stood tall, then bowed her head. This king had not condemned her, he had not banished her. Arthur looked at her curiously, as if she was someone he remembered from a long time ago. Morgana's guard a broken bar, he mused. I know a broken bar, yes, sire, Elund replied. Just as he was about to say something else, Arthur turned, looking over his shoulder. My broken bar, my ward a broken bar. Morgana, standing in the archway of the stonework along the passageway, stopped, and looked in their direction. Yes, sire? For a moment a broken bar. For a slight moment, Elund thought that the lady had said father, and Arthur daughter. She glanced at Morgana again, who gave her a brief smile. Good, Arthur concluded, as if that settled matters. We are watching the night strain today, Attendal AD. Sire. Elund nodded, then raised her head, watching Arthur return to the end of the passageway and then go through into another that would take him back to the throne room. You're with me, Morgana told Aled as she came closer, blessing her with a smile. And they went to her chambers, where Gwen busied herself with Morgana's outfits for the day, and Aled watched through the window, gauging the best place to stand. You heard me, Morgana told her, as they walked down to the training ground. In the passageway when Arthur spoke, she placed a hand on Aled's arm. You heard right, he is my father. Morgause came again to Camelot, this time with proof. And you have magic, Elund replied, whispering the words as she fought her very heart to ask instead about Arthur's situation, if Morgause had brought proof. At this, Morgana pushed Elund's shoulder and they both disappeared into a training tent. She expected Morgana to berate her for this. Instead, the young woman drew her close. It began with dreams, a broken bar, nightmares, a broken bar for which Gaius was treating me. And then, I set fire to my drapes. Did you dislike them that much? Elund asked, sarcastically. Morgana, about to correct her, turned up her pretty nose and laughed. I've missed you, Aled, she told Elund. Even at my worst, you always could make me laugh. She took a step closer to Elund and then dipped her head a little, bringing her face close to hers. She thought that the lady was about to turn her lightheartedness into cold menace, but instead, She planted a kiss on her cheek. On Niceman, with a druid, Elune told Morgana, answering her unspoken question, then added, a north and a little west. All those with magic that I saw there were at peace. The look on Morgana's face told Elune everything she needed to know. Morgana wanted an end to the disturbances, an end to the confusing nature of her power, and all this was set in the context that her guardian, her father, had burned people alive just on the flimsy say-so of others that they had magic. Of course she was terrified. Arthur's words don't matter now, Morgana told Elune, misinterpreting the silence. It's what Arthur says that matters. Morgana led them out onto the field, where the knights were training, Elune finishing the dialogue in her own mind. Yes, that's what is quite concerning. 88,888,888. The training grounds of Camelot were usually filled with the rhythmic clanging of steel and the boisterous shouts of men pushing their limits. Today, however, the atmosphere was heavy, dampened by a prince whose heart wasn't in the fight. Arthur stood in the center of the ring, his thumb tracing the pommel of his sword. His mind was miles away, trapped in the cold dampness of the betrayal Morgause had revealed. Magic. For his conception, the great dragon had been right to target Camelot over Arthur's massacre. Magic. The very word was a poison in Camelot, yet it was the ingredient of his own existence. He was a byproduct of an enchantment. A life has been taken when his mother had died, as had been the price. Sire? Leon's voice broke through the haze. The men are ready. Arthur blinked, refocusing on the circle of knights. Gawain, Percival, Ellen, and Leon. They were watching him with varying degrees of concern. Right, Arthur said, his voice sounding hollow even to himself. Basic drills. Pairs. Now. The knights moved into position, but the usual banter was missing. Even Gawain, usually the first to make a crack about Arthur's hair or Merlin's incompetence, stayed quiet. They could see the tension in the set of Arthur's jaw, and could see why. Merlin noticed first, as he affixed Arthur's breastplate, and then Gawain's astonishment, his mouth falling open. Beside Morgana was Elune. Sire? Arthur turned his head at Leon's word, engaging with Ellen, but his strikes were sluggish, lacking their usual precision. Every time he swung his sword, he thought of the Burge, the thousands of lives lost to a war his father started to cover up his own hypocrisy, and the midsummer night where those who had, essentially been turned over by so-called friends for half a loaf, had burned, their cries seared into his memory. You're open, Arthur, Ellen muttered, pulling a strike that would have easily caught the princes in the ribs. Again, Arthur snapped, his frustration finally bubbling to the surface. Then, a sound over at the stands drew his attention. Morgana was laughing. While it sounded merry and with good humor, Arthur lowered his sword, looking at Aled, beside her, and didn't see the criminal he had banished. Instead, he saw a person who had made a mistake and had spent time in the wilderness, for that was what the land was in any direction out from Camelot, excepting Mercia, and Arthur guessed that if Elune had gone back to Mercia she would not have returned to Camelot. Your words were permanent, Arthur, Leon reminded the prince, gripping his sword, tensely, and made to march over to Elune to tell her so. No, Arthur told him, placing a hand on his arm. For one thing, his father had reinstated Aled, and for another, if he was the product of Magi, the very thing he had been taught to hate, then what did justice even mean anymore? The decree was mine, Arthur said, his voice regaining some of its natural authority. And I am the one who rescinds it. He stepped toward Elune, the dirt of the pit crunching under his boots. You were a good warrior, better than most, he added, giving into Elune's eyebrow raise of disdain at the word good. Arthur tried not to let his gaze linger on his father when he added, if you've come to resume your duties, pick up a practice sword. Let's see if the North has made you soft. A small smile touched Elune's lips. Relieved, yes, but as Mordred had reminded her, she would have returned anyway. Morgana nodded, giving Elune permission to spar, and she stepped onto the grass, catching a blunt raining blade tossed by an amused Percival. The energy on the grass shifted instantly. The gloom didn't vanish but, with Elune before him, it transformed into a grim resolve. Arthur took his stance against Aeled, and raised his sword. Hers met his with a dull, blunt sound filling the air for the first time in days. Arthur wasn't thinking about Kilgore or the lies of the past, instead he was focused on the woman in front of him, flowing and attacking and defending, making him work harder on the field than he has done in some time. Merlin, watching from the sidelines with a pile of discarded armor, caught Arthur's eye. Arthur didn't smile, but the tension in his shoulders had dropped an inch. Elund, Merlin thought. You came. It was a start. She struck out, catching Arthur's hand. He retaliated with an uppercut that shoved her lower arm out of position, wrenching her shoulder. And then, mid-duel, Arthur stalked off the field, ignoring the shouts for him to return, and did not look back. 88,888,888 Elune found him in the armory so late that evening that the moon was beginning to set, systematically dismantling a rack of practice shields, his movements wild, uncoordinated, and lethal. The sound of splintering ash echoed against the stone walls like bone-breaking. He looked like a man who had tried to fight the air and lost. I told you I would hang you, Arthur said. He didn't look up from the shield he was staring at, the crest of the House of Pendragon, now looking like a brand of shame. You'll have to catch me first, Elune replied, stepping into the torchlight. Besides, didn't you take it back? Arthur's head snapped up. The sight of her, travel-worn, exhausted, but standing with the steady grace sent a visible shock through him. The rage that had been simmering in his gut for days suddenly collided with a profound, terrifying relief. You are a traitor, he hissed, though he made no move for his sword. He stepped toward her, his space-invading presence forcing her back against a stone pillar. You lied to me. About the Saxons. About everything. I lied about my blood because Arthur would have burned me with those poor wretches, Elune countered, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could see the raw, bleeding skin on his knuckles. But I never was a Saxon traitor. Heng just had to believe I was a Saxon. She reached out, her fingers hovering just inches from his bruised hand. From the air between them was thick with the usual one-upmanship that they settled into when neither could, or would, express their feelings on any matter. That night, what was suppressed was longing and the fresh, bitter sting of his betrayal. Merlin says you're going to kill him, she whispered. He says you've let more gauze into your head. She showed me the truth, Arthur roared, slamming his hand against the pillar beside her head. He was so close she could see the flecks of gold in his panicked eyes. My mother died so I could be born of magic. It was his deal. Everything I am is a lie. Then make the truth yourself. Elune grabbed the front of his tunic, her strength surprising him, as she pulled him to within half an inch to her own self. I am a half-say who loves a man who banished her. My life is a mess, but I choose where I stand. If you kill Arthur in a fit of anger, you aren't a hero. You're just as bad as he is. The attraction was alive between them, born of desperate shared battles and cold nights in pouring rain guarding walls and citizens from the dangers without. Arthur's gaze dropped to her mouth for a moment. For a moment, their status didn't matter, their banishment didn't matter. Respects. Elune interjected, Respects a man who banished here a broken bar. But Arthur hadn't really been listening, for he did not respond to the clumsy correction. I can't do this, Elune, he confessed, his voice breaking. I'm not strong enough to look at him. You don't have to be strong alone, she whispered, her thumb brushing the back of his hand, as she lowered it to her cheeks. Pick up your sword, we're going to the council chamber, and we're going to end this properly. But Arthur simply stood there, still inches from her face. He picked up his hand and instead of placing it on his sword, touched Elune's cheek with a softness that she had never thought possible. You're a broken bar, stop, she told him sharply, her voice low and gritty, a soldier's command. It cut through the red haze of his anger. Arthur swung back, and stepped away from her, gripping his sword with a strangulating grip. Had it been a person, they would be dead by now. He killed her, Elune. He used the evil he executes people for every day to buy my life here. Broken bar. I am a product of the very thing he hates most. You are a product of your own choices, Arthur, she reasoned, stepping into his reach despite the white-knuckle grip he held on his sword. "Don't give me your mercenary platitudes," he roared, slamming a gauntleted fist into a stone pillar. "I'm going to kill him. I'm going to end the lie before it chokes me." He pushed past her, his intent a physical weight in the room. Elune grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his leather bracer with the desperate strength of a woman who had spent her life putting in twice as much effort than a man for half the reward. She drew herself to him again. This time there was nothing between them. "If you do, you'll become everything he is," she whispered to him, her face inches from his. "You'll become a murderer to punish a murderer. And who leads Camelot then?" "Morgauzy Broken Bar." "Senrida Broken Bar." "You're the only thing keeping this place from darkness, Arthur. If you strike Arthur down in rage, you'll cause a civil war that will burn at the end." Arthur stepped closer to Elune, their bodies as close to one another as it were possible to be while still clothed. "Maybe it deserves to burn." "Then burn me first," she challenged. Her voice cracked, revealing a raw devotion she usually kept hidden. "Reign with my blood." Arthur froze. The sight of her, the traitor who had been faithful, who had been constant, loyal, made his stomach ache. He stepped away from her, and coughed, running a hand through his hair before slumping against a pillar, his head dropping into his hands as the rage collapsed into grief. 88,888,888, and there they stayed till morning. Arthur did not go to Gwen that night. He couldn't. Gwen represented the pure future, the light and the peace he craved, but he felt too tarnished, too tainted by the sorcery of his birth to be in her presence. Instead, he retreated to the shadows of the battlements, where the wind was cold and the truth was bare. Elune followed him. She stood beside him in silence, a flagon of ale she had swiped from Rodri that evening in her hand, which she offered to the prince and which he accepted. Arthur smiled, grateful for her steady presence as a comrade, who understood the grit of the world and did not expect perfection of him. "He's my father," Arthur whispered into the beginnings of the dawnlight. "However can I look at him now and not see my mother's ghost?" "Would you like to swap fathers?" Elune asked. Her question, so frivolous, made Arthur give a short laugh out loud, decide to look at him as a man who was so afraid of being weak that he became a monster. Elune said, her voice soft but firm, resisting the urge to take his hand, to place her mouth on his. "You are not him, Arthur Pendragon. You did not ask for the bargain to be made. You are the one who can break the cycle, step beyond your father, make a new world." Arthur reached out suddenly, his hand finding hers on the cold stone. He didn't pull away this time, and neither did Elune, though it was causing her physical agony to not respond to his gesture. "I don't know if I can do this without you." He turned, suddenly, letting go of her hand, withdrawing his sword. For a moment, Elune's adrenaline kicked in, and she looked for her escape options. "Kneel," Arthur commanded. Now, he held the sword aloft and, because Elune could think of no better option, she knelt. "I, Prince Arthur of Camelot," Arthur intoned, dubbed the Sir Aeled of Gwalod. He placed the blade on Elune's right shoulder and then her left, "to be deferred to my coronation." He stepped back, and held out his hand. Elune took it and let Arthur help her to her feet. There were no words that could qualify the majesty of the moment. Aeled had been knighted, and Elune had accepted this exaltation. The moment, however, was shattered by a low, melodic whistle from the woods below. Elune stiffened, her blood turning to ice. She knew that sound. It was the signal she and Matthew, Mordred, had used as children in the village. A call across the rift of their shared history. Morgana. Somehow, this involved her. What was that? Arthur asked, his instincts instantly returning to the defense of the city. Nothing, Elune lied, the word tasting like ash on her tongue, considering the solemn, spiritual honor he had just bestowed on her. A night bird, perhaps, caught in the wind. She watched as a small, hooded figure moved at the edge of the tree line. Mordred was watching them. He saw the prince's hand still in hers, and even from the distance, Elune could feel the boy's cold, possessive disapproval vibrating through the air. As Arthur stood up, his resolve somewhat restored by her presence, he looked out at the dark woods. "We'll double the watch. I feel ... something is coming, Aeled," something beyond the practical. Something that will keep you from becoming your father by killing him, enough of a distraction to focus on logical defense strategy for the city, and your land. Something might already be here, she muttered, throwing her divided loyalty into a dark corner of her mind, and locking it away as tightly as she could.